Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, berating your PRO for not figuring out a way to collect royalties from Shazam, or else a scrappy upstart, trying desperately not to pay royalties for a riff you sampled. This is your show, because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the fourth Friday of March 2023, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made. And it would always be some guy named Artie who drove a Buick LeSabre with a custom grill and who was always trying to sell you illegal modifications to paintball guns. And old Artie would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates. Bandzoogle would like to congratulate its users on over $100 million in sales through their websites. Listeners to the Working Songwriter Podcast can go to bandzoogle.com and try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, you can check out my tour page, joepugmusic.com/tour, where there are a bevy of new tour dates posted all around the world, from Seattle to Annapolis, Maryland, baby. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you certainly don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show and because you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who's taken the time in the capital to support the show in that way. If you're not in a place where you can contribute in that way, there's still a couple ways that you can contribute for free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store, or second, you could tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. Thanks for being here this week, and I hope that you dig our chat. Our guests this week have sold over 10 million records, and they also hold the record for the most #1 singles on Billboard's mainstream rock charts. Zach Myers and Eric Bass are the creative core of Shinedown, a modern rock outfit hailing originally from Jacksonville, Florida. After folding his previous project, Dreve, Myers put together the core of his new group, which finally found its musical identity with the addition of Bass. They've recorded for Atlantic and Roadrunner Records. Their music has dominated the rock radio format for the last 2 decades. Billboard calls them stomping heavy rock. Glide magazine says that their music never slacks when it comes to the honesty of human emotions. I actually recorded this interview with them last year when their new album, Planet Zero, was coming out, but the hard drive on my computer melted down, and I thought that this interview was lost forever. That is, until it appeared in my cloud drive several weeks ago. I was very happy to find it. If only the same thing would happen with my lost Richard Thompson interview. There's always time to hope and to pray. Anyway, I hope you dig our conversation about their musical journey so far. Brent and Eric of Shinedown, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter Podcast. Brent, I want to begin with your musical trajectory first. You originally hail from Knoxville, Tennessee. What did music look like in your household growing up?
It didn't look like anything. I had to fight, scratch, claw, hide tapes, you name it, man. My parents were like, they're my biggest fans in the world now, and they love the band, and they're so proud of everything. But I grew up in a very religious household, so early on, because I was so just enamored with music, and it was everything that, my DNA is literally, that's what my DNA is. It's just musical notes. But to my parents, they were like, I had such a, I guess the best way to put it, it was everything to me. And I think that they were trying to manage expectations, if you will. So they didn't necessarily jump on the bandwagon of necessarily like supporting me, in the get-go, like in the beginning, but it's changed over time. But yeah, interesting enough, I had to hide a lot of records from my parents so I could listen to them.
Well, how do you think that augmented your creative path then, that you didn't exactly have the parents, buying you the Iggy Pop records and buying you the electric guitar and stuff like that?
The interesting thing is my dad did buy me an electric guitar. He actually bought me a bass guitar too. You know what? I think more than anything, what it did was, and I do remember being 14 years old and my dad coming in because, he didn't really care about the music as much as my mom did, because she just didn't, she just was concerned about what I was listening to. But I remember my dad actually coming into my room when I was 14, and he gave me an Otis Redding tape, of all things, which was like an anthology, greatest hits. And I remember listening to that for the first time, and it just completely changed my life, because Otis Redding got me to Nina Simone, got me to Ella Fitzgerald, got me to Billie Holiday, Sam Cooke, Al Green, Marvin Gaye, so on and so forth. So from that aspect, that definitely changed my trajectory from like heavy guitars and certain styles of music, as far as where singers were like really aggressive and what have you. I found out that there was another element to a voice where the voice could actually be an instrument.
Yeah. Now, Shinedown would begin in the early 2000s out of the ashes of a former band. You ended up having a deal with Atlantic, and you would make it rise out of that. How did a kid who was, in a household where his folks were like, listen, kid, take it easy, this might not work out for you. How did you go from there to, in your very early 20s, a deal with Atlantic and going from one band to another?
Some of it was the right place at the right time. But also, at 15, I had a fake ID. I had a friend of mine who had an older brother. I kind of looked like him. So, it just said that I was 18. So I could get into these clubs kind of secretively, and I could play in these places and what have you. So, that was kind of early on. But a lot of it was just, the band that was signed to Atlantic first, one of the reasons that happened, and there was even a demo phase of that, was just playing constantly in like the local scene. And we would even go up to, certain parts of like North Carolina, parts of Georgia. We would play and kind of get on these like regional tours where, we do like a weekend warrior type thing. And obviously we all had day jobs and things of that nature. But anytime that we could play, anywhere that we could play, we just played. And I had a friend of mine who knew an A&R guy and got our demo in front of him. The name of the A&R guy is a guy by the name of Steve Robertson. In the industry, he's known as Steve-O, and he's still our A&R 20 years later.
Wow.
But that ultimately, with the first project that was signed, some of it was the right place at the right time, but it was also just we were playing anywhere and everywhere that we could possibly play.
Yeah. You just had a motor to you, and you wanted to make things happen. So when that original group, things dissolve, and Shinedown comes out of that, that first record, I mean, it would go on, maybe not immediately, but it would go on to sell, over 1 million copies. Great success at the very start. How did a dude in his early 20s navigate a situation like that? You go from a band breaking up to this new one starting that you found, and then it goes on to see a lot of success. Speaking for myself, if that had happened to me, I would have fucked a lot of shit up, man. So like, really though, I mean, 22 years old, it's really young. Like, how did you navigate that?
Well, I fucked up a lot of shit.
Fair enough.
So, no, man. I mean, ultimately, I think, me and Eric have said this to people before because it's true, and we've gotten it from other friends of ours that are in the industry, but there's a unique way of saying it. Like, you'll get your whole life to do your first record. And if that record is successful, you'll get about 6 months to do your next one. And in a lot of ways, that's what happened. But navigating it, listen, I was young, and it's crazy because we actually just got a new certification for Leave a Whisper, which is the debut record that you're talking about. It is now, it has become 3 times platinum, which is nuts. And I just found out about this in the last 72 hours. But the fact of the matter is, the trajectory that we had on the first 2 records had a lot to do with, we knew that the media did not necessarily like the higher end media. I'm not going to name names, but they didn't really get us. They didn't understand us. They weren't there knocking on our door to do publications and put us on the cover of any magazines, or MTV wasn't really playing us, things of that nature. But what we found was that there was this camaraderie and this respect in terrestrial radio. And radio really dug the band. And a lot of that, and to this day, we have such a relationship with radio. Obviously now with the changing side of things with DSPs and streaming services, you have to, adapt or die. But when I think about those first 2 records, I think what solidified a lot of it was the fact that we just never said no to radio. Whatever they wanted, get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, do morning shows. We played, me and Eric have been in a lot of people's backyards, playing barbecues or whatever. You just didn't say no. You know what I mean? You just do what they ask you to do. And you'll find, now, going into, it's crazy with Planet Zero on mainstream rock, going into its 5th week at number 1, which is our 28th single as a band. It's astonishing. It's
beautiful. Now, Eric, you would join Shinedown in 2008. Before then, you had kind of followed a path of playing in a band, but then getting more interested and involved on the recording and producing side of things. What did music look like in your household growing up, and how did that lead to your kind of unique path, the one that you've carved out so far?
Well, Brent and I have a very similar story in that way that I've come from a very religious family. Music was encouraged in our house, but maybe not rock music. My mother was a musician, music major in college, that sort of thing, vocal major. She was a singer. She played in bands and whatnot. My dad was a naval commander, so he wasn't he really wasn't into it too much. So it was in the very beginning, it was more of a fight against my dad, I guess. And it wasn't a fight, but he didn't want me to have a guitar. He had served under Admiral Morrison, who was Jim Morrison's father. He had served under him at the Pentagon. So he knew this story of this kid who'd gotten into drugs and kind of ruined his life, became famous, ruined his life. And I think that sort of colored his perception of what could happen if I got into rock and roll. But, we grew up with everything was like on Sundays, all we could listen to was church music. We weren't allowed to listen to any sort of secular music on Sundays. We could listen to classical music, but we couldn't listen to anything lyrically that wasn't like church music. But that's, for me, as far as my musical evolution goes, like I'm hugely inspired by that music, by church music, gospel music, church music. We had a lot of musicals, a lot of Rodgers and Hammerstein, a lot of Broadway stuff, West Side Story and Seven Brides for Seven Brothers and Mary Poppins. And, that stuff was always in our house. But as soon as I started getting into rock music, I remember my father found in the top of my closet when I was 8 years old, he found the 45 of Quiet Riot single, Come On Feel the Noise. And then Gene Simmons's solo record album in the top of my closet, and he threw both of them out. They were devil. It was devil music, and we didn't want that in the house. But fast forward 30 years later, 40 years later, whatever it is, 30 years later, I guess. And he comes to me, he goes, "Hey, have you ever heard of this guy, Gene Simmons?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I have." And he goes, "Man, I watched an interview with him the other day. He's really got his shit together." And I'm like, "Do you remember throwing out my record?" And he swears he doesn't. He's like, "No, I don't remember that." I'm like, "Well, you're lying." But I mean, my mom actually got me an electric guitar for Christmas, and it was sort of like a Christmas Story thing with the BB gun, where she kind of did it behind my dad's back, But once I heard, I'd grown up with all those, like I said, the classical, big band too, lots of big band music in our house. And one day, man, when I was probably 12 years old, 13 years old, I heard Poison Talk Dirty to Me come on the radio, because all I listened to was top 40 radio. I didn't have like really any, at that point, we just sat around the radio and listened to whatever was there. And I heard that guitar lick, man, and it was like that insane, for me at the time, that a kid of that age, that was just an insane sounding guitar, and that was it, man. I was set on my path of wanting to be a professional musician and wanting to be a guitar player and be in a famous rock band, and it never left me. But at one point though, I was touring in vans and struggling and playing in regional bands. Much like what Brent's first band was, the same type of thing where you're playing dive bars and clubs and trying to make it. And I've been doing it for a while. And I just decided that I was getting pretty good at engineering our demos for our band. And I kind of parlayed that into a studio gig and of my own, my own studio. I didn't go to work at another place, but just kind of started my own thing. And, that actually led me to, if I hadn't made that switch and taken that path, I wouldn't be here right now, because the work that I did with bands in the studio as a producer and songwriter and engineer led me to Steve Robertson, Steve-O, who Brent was just talking about. And Steve-O led me to Shinedown. So,
well, talk to me then about how your two musical paths converge, because learning more about your band, your creative partnership seems pretty unique in that I don't think it's too common for someone to join a very successful band a few years in and then immediately become, such an integral creative contributing member, co-writing, producing, and doing stuff like that. So how did you guys first start working together creatively, and when did you know that it was going to be like a thing?
The first time I met Brent and Barry and Jason Todd, who was in the band at the time, the guitar player. They came to Charleston to write with me for what would be the Sound of Madness record. And that's where we first met. We actually met in 2007, I believe, Brent, something like that, early 2007. Yeah. And that was just an interesting experiment and experience, kind of having all of us in the same room, because none of us were the same people that we are now. Like, it was a whole other thing. I was very invested in the studio life. I had no real thoughts of leaving to go join a band. Brent and Shinedown were not in exactly a healthy place as far as addiction issues go and that sort of thing. And it just seemed worlds apart. But we got along really, really well. And that was the thing. Like, we kind of clicked. I think between Barry and Brent and myself, we all kind of have we all have very similar family stories or family upbringings, and a lot of our families are very similar. There are certain differences, but we're all raised kind of the same way. So we did have that common thing with each other. Brent and I went out the first night we were together and burned it down and drank all the Jägermeister we could get our hands on, and had to call my wife to come pick us up. And I think maybe it was preordained at that point, but then fast forward, the Sound of Madness had been recorded by the time I heard from Steve again and the band again. And, they were like, do you want to come audition to play bass? And so I went and did that, and it worked out. But I think really the first time we creatively did anything was a song called Diamond Eyes, and, really dug in on it, and I produced that. And, we wrote that together. Brent wrote all of the lyrics for that song. And melody. I was still a music guy. This is one thing that you talk about, like the way we've ended up where we are now. It's been a huge learning process for me to end up where we are now as a songwriter, because I was always music centric, melody centric. Not really. I didn't. Lyrics never made me tick that much, and now it couldn't be more the opposite. Getting to work with Brent a lot and other great songwriters like Dave Bassett, who we work with a good bit. And Zach is also a great writer. Working with these guys and learning how to be a really great lyricist has been such a huge part of my journey with the band anyway. And I really think that I've come into my own with that in the past, 3 or 4 years. But it was just a process of starting with Diamond Eyes, and then we worked on a bunch of songs for Threat to Survival, and then of course, Attention. We wrote for Amaryllis as well. I forgot about that record. We wrote a good bit on Amaryllis as well. But lyrically, every single record, every single time that we would get in a room and really dig in on songs, I would just start to key more into the lyrical side of things. And now, through that learning process of writing together, I personally have arrived at a place where I think I'm a really good lyricist, and I can convey emotion. I always thought it was sort of a magic trick when someone could say more in 6 words than most people can say in 600.
Yeah.
It's like, for me, it's songwriting is the only alchemy in the world, where you're pulling something that doesn't exist out of thin air and forming it into something and putting it back out into the air in a different form. It's amazing. And it always seemed, the lyrics always seem to escape me. But one thing that I've learned from Brent and from people like Dave and Zach as well is write honestly, write what write what you feel. Don't try to write something that doesn't mean anything to you, because it'll never come off the right way. So, yeah, I know that's maybe a very long-winded answer from my viewpoint of how we kind of ended up where we are. But
Brent, how did you when you guys first started working together, what did you notice first as a songwriter working together, and what have you learned over the years? What have you taken from the partnership?
I learned very, very early on that Eric is you can't put him into a box, because he's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the musicality of things. It's one of the things that makes him a great producer. It's one of the things that makes him a great engineer, is that he knows what he's doing. He knows what he's talking about. He's very musically inclined with a lot of different instruments, because he can play a lot of different things. Obviously having a mother with a piano background and a vocal background, he has relatively, to my knowledge, working with him day in and day out, he has perfect pitch, and I know it kind of drives him crazy sometimes, but it's something that not a lot of people have. He is somebody, for me personally, when I watch the way that he will weave in and out of any situation, because he is so musically inclined, he can work off of different instruments. So he can go to each guy in the band, or whatever project he's working with. Like if he's working with a band that has, say, 9 different people and there's all these different instruments, he knows how to collectively work with those individual people, but then he knows how to put everything together. I am definitely the type of person that I know what I'm good at, I know what my strengths are, and I'm just really lucky. Myself, Zach, and Barry are just very, very lucky to be not only in a band with Eric, but also it's not very common in this day and age to be in a band where one of the band members is also the collective in current times, where that band member is also the engineer, mixer, and producer of the band's last two full-length albums. And you know, when we work together, I think, like Eric was saying, lyrically, and why the lyrics are so important, where maybe in the beginning Eric was a bit more all about the music and kind of looking at, because it's a lot to juggle, especially when you're an engineer, a producer, and a mixer. You know, it's not like me where I have two main focuses. What is the message in the song, and how can I convey it in the most passionate way possible? Those are kind of my two main things. But with Eric, he can juggle a lot of different things. But I will say, over time, we've been so lucky with each other because, like you said, you know, working directly for the first time with Diamond Eyes. And then when we moved into the Amaryllis album, you know, we worked the songwriting team, which was myself and Eric and Dave. Songs like Unity, songs like Enemies. Me and Eric wrote the song I'll Follow You together. I can go on and on. And then going into Threat, which was a lot of different producers, a lot of different mixers. But right then and there, on Threat, Eric did Cut the Cord. Me and Eric wrote it. And that song went through a bunch of like time where we thought we knew what the chorus was going to be. And then I showed up and he had the band there before me. And then he dropped the bomb on me and said,
yeah, I told him I changed the chorus without him knowing about it.
Yeah, no big deal.
You know, it just,
no big deal.
Well, the chorus on the demo was decent, but it wasn't great, I thought. And I, you know, I had the band there to track the song, and then I took some initiative and just changed the entire thing.
Yeah.
So,
and to his credit with that, that's an example of like, that was like the first time where like I showed up. He had done something where, I'll tell you straight up, when I arrived, I was like, what? Yeah. But that's what makes him who he is, because 8 hours later, we had a way better chorus to cut the cord.
Right.
And
but it also seems like
into,
you would have to be in a certain place as a writer to take a note like that or take a critique like that. I mean, we've all been in places in our lives creatively when we would get a perfectly fine note from somebody and you just, you know, so how had you gotten to a place where you could listen to a note like that and take it?
Well, because he hashed it out with me. Like, he didn't go, hey, I changed this, so write something over it. I'll see you in a couple of hours. You better have something. It's not like that. Yeah. Like, he was like, I changed it, and we're going to hash it out together.
Very,
and
very, very.
8 hours later, we had it.
Very rarely, I mean, if ever, I mean, it happens occasionally, but very rarely does anything with us work like what he just said, like where, you know, one of us just doesn't send off it'll happen occasionally. It happened with a song like Get Up. Brent took Get Up and wrote the initial lyrics to that by himself. But most of the time, everything happens in a room together. Like we don't do anything individually. It's more of everything's happening at the same time. Like for Attention, I wrote, just to have it, I was bored on tour. I wrote like 22 pieces of music, just musical demos that I had melody ideas for. And out of those 22 things on the album Attention, we used one of them, you know, because it just works better when you're in the room together. Like that was like an insurance policy. Like, I know I have all this musical, you know, stuff over here, but it always works better when we just sit down in a room with a guitar or with a piano. It always starts that way. Very rarely does it start with an electric guitar. It's usually an acoustic or a piano or something, and just start writing a song. You know, it works way better for us when we're together. So in a case like Cut the Cord, again, I did take some liberties with that, and I did potentially put Brent in a situation, but it would never be something where I'm like, you know, I don't sit around. We always tell each other this too when we're writing. I'm not waiting on him to be brilliant, and he's not waiting on me to come up with something brilliant. Like it's going to happen. The song's going to be great when it's done. We'll just have to work through it. And so I would never throw that on him and be like, dude, come up with something awesome for this new thing that you didn't know existed 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
know?
Brent, I want to drill down on something that you mentioned, like your kernel for a song, you basically said was you like to have the idea of the message that you want to get through with it, and then how to tie that message to, how to get that message across with the right amount of intensity. What does your process look like for catching one of those kernels, and how do you put yourself in a place where you can get as many of those as possible?
Well, I'm lucky that I'm able to surround myself with the hardest workers in the room, because that's kind of the way that we look at everything in the band. Sometimes you get a gift, like me and Eric have talked about this before. Every once in a while, you'll be in a session or you're doing something, and maybe you've been working on songs. You've got a couple of songs for a new record. You're not necessarily hitting a dry spell or writer's block, but you're just trying to navigate what the next thing is going to be. And lo and behold, something out of thin air, the universe will hand you something, and you don't know where it came from and why it came to you, but you can't ignore it, and you just got to write it. And there are a lot of songs like that. And then there's songs where when we're in the room with one another, the music and the melody idea is just, at least for me and Eric, is awesome, and we love it. But you got to hash out what the message is. You know, you got the melody, you got the music, but you're trying to find that spark that is something that is inspiring you. And because you have to be inspired before the rest of the world's going to be inspired. So I don't think there's there's not like a roadmap to it necessarily, or an instruction manual. Sometimes it comes to you very, very quickly. And sometimes you just got to be willing to hash it out with one another.
That sounds very much like it dovetails with Eric's notion of songwriting almost being like a sort of alchemy. Like you out of the ether almost, it seems. You grab something that wasn't there before, and 5 minutes later it's there, and it exists in reality.
Yeah, it's important to be aware of that too, and to like really pay attention to what the universe is presenting you.
Yeah, and you can't ignore it when it does present it to you. If it presents it to you at 5 a.m. with your eyes open in your bed, for God's sakes, get up and write it down. Or for God's sakes, get up and sing it, because it won't be there. I promise you'll forget it. You can always say to yourself, I'll remember this. My phone is just, and I'm sure most songwriters' phones are littered with voice memos of just ideas that come out of nowhere like that. And, you know, when it's really magical though, is when that happens, when you're in a session writing with somebody, with your brother, you know, and your you know, those little droplets start to fall out of the air and just fall into place, almost like you're just like, Brent will throw a line out and I'll throw a line out, and he'll throw a line out and I'll throw a line out, and it just all weaves together. There's a song on our new record called "A Symptom of Being Human," and that's one of those songs for me where that was sort of the thing. It was just like, that song didn't take a long time to write, from my recollection. It just kind of happened, and those things don't happen very often like that. A lot of the time, you're sitting in a room. You know, I think there's an Instagram video of me when we were writing, pulling my hair out, just saying, I need an I word. I need a word that rhymes with I that doesn't suck. You know, and I'm just like pulling my hair out, trying to come up with something, and that's it a lot of the time. But then every so often, because you put that effort in, and because you because you have prepared yourself for those moments, you'll be rewarded with you know, drops of genius from the universe, and you can channel that stuff. You know, it's amazing how it will just appear, and like, it didn't come from you, it came from somewhere else. And that's really that's what makes songwriting a lot of fun, man, when those moments happen.
Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is The Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. Let's talk a little bit about the writing of and recording of this new record, because you mentioned earlier, Brent, how unusual it is for a band in this day and age to be able to do all the recording, engineering, producing in-house. And with this most recent one, you went even a step further, Eric. You built your new studio, Big Animal. You built it yourself. What I thought about when I was reading about this, and this might be a stupid comparison, but I hope that it's not, in the culinary thing for like the last 10 to 15 years, the whole thing has been about like snout to tail, eat the whole pig. We make our cheese in-house. We make our own this, that, or the other. We do it all under this roof. And that gives our food a certain terroir, a certain, idiosyncrasy to it that you can't get anywhere else. And that's what I thought about when I heard the way that you made this most recent record. Can you talk about making this new record, but specifically within the lens of doing it in this new studio that was your own?
It was this record was the most difficult record I've ever made, and probably because we were coming right out of building the studio right into making a record. The record was pretty much written for the most part before I started building the studio. I think we wrote one or two songs. Well, I take that back. We did write a few during the building of the studio. But it felt like, I think there were some initial songs written before we built the studio, and then we started building and then wrote some others. But coming out of building the place, which is beautiful, and I'm very proud of it, and we're very proud of it. There was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that went into it, and it's a special place. But kind of being burned out from building the place and then jumping right in to do a record was something that I would not advise anybody to do. I'd give yourself at least a month or two breathing room before you do that. But you're right. It definitely gave. This record has a different flavor than any of the other records. And to use your analogy of the culinary world, it's got its own. When you're able to put your hands and your heart on every aspect of a record, rather than channeling it through a different producer or through lots of different editors and whatever, when you're doing all of it yourself, it takes on a whole other life, and it's not an easy thing to do. It's not as Brent would say, it's not for the faint of heart to take on something like that. And I'm not painting us or myself as some sort of hero. I mean, you do it because you love it. And that's most important, but it definitely will take a toll on you. And it took a toll on me. It took a toll on me emotionally and physically, because you just care so much. But what you end up with in the end, hopefully, is a record that sounds nothing like anybody else's record. And, it's not been run through a factory. It's not been run through somebody's presets that they run everybody's records through. You're starting from scratch with something. With every song we started from scratch basically, and got different tones and different sounds. There's not one guitar tone running through the record. There's not one drum sound that runs through the record. Even piano wise, like a piano on one song, I'd pull the mics off and I'd re-mic it and redo it a different way for another song, just to create a different listening experience. And lyrically, as far as the writing goes on the record and the subject matter that's in the record, it was also that. It was, we're writing about, the experiences that the whole world has gone through for the past few years, from our lens, viewed that way. but not trying to write the same song over and over and over again. So it definitely, I would love to think that this record is a, a 20 course meal, to go back to your analogy, and every single course is a little different, and everything provides you with something different. And
there's also a huge element here too with Eric. Eric knows the technicalities of analog gear, plugins. He knows all that stuff, but he doesn't mix with ones and zeros. Like Eric mixes with his ears and his heart. And there's a big difference in that. When you're a mixer and you're getting inundated with a lot of different music and different styles and different artists and stuff like that, that's your job. That's all fine and good. The thing that separates what we're doing from someone else is that it is all in-house. So like Eric said, it's his baby, it's his child. And so obviously he is going to mix it. He's going to care for it. He's going to produce it. He's going to create it in a much different way. And that is one of the things that I'm so grateful for, that we're allowed to do it this way, because not everybody can do it like this. But that with Eric and, doing these records, that he's going to exhaust every single facet of every single song to make sure that it is presented to the world the way that the band wants it to be heard.
Now, Brent, what were some of the messages that you were coming across on this album with, and were they ones that you knew going into the process that that record was going to be about, or did they emerge through the writing process in the studio?
I think a lot of it came it was very apparent that everything was happening in real time from a lyrical standpoint and from a message. I arrived in South Carolina with Eric in the summer of 2020. Me and him kind of had this idea of like, maybe we'll use a crystal ball method, because no one's going to want to talk about this 3 years from now. We're going to want to forget about it. We'll have moved on and what have you. And the reality of that was things just weren't getting any better. And that would be the difference, like with Attention being a story album, being a conceptual piece. That's about like the trajectory of years of situations, if you will. It's a human record, but it's like your livelihood. It's your lifetime. Planet Zero, everything is happening in real time of the last 2.5 years. And we're going through this, we're experiencing all of this with everybody. So that's what made it, that's what just made the process really intense. Going back to the lyrical side of things, like Eric said, it was every day we walked in, yes, we were having a great time with one another. Yes, we laughed a lot. And yes, we break up, not the monotony, but you got to kind of, when you're having this really, really tense subject matter and you're digging really deep on this stuff, you have to have kind of an element of comic relief at times. But at the same point, there's so much going on. And what you're talking about is so serious because the rest of the world is going through it too. You have an obligation and a responsibility to step it up. And you also have to be, me and Eric looked at each other a bunch of times and we were like, if we're going to go here, we're going to go this far. We all have to be on the line together. Like when somebody says, hey man, I got your back. I don't need you to have my back. I need you to have my shoulder. I need you to get on the line with me. And, this was an intense process, man, but the proof is in the pudding, man. I think it's, for me personally, it's one of my proudest moments of being a songwriter is this record.
It sounds like this is not a record that you could have written 20 years ago when you started as a songwriter. So what were some of the lessons and techniques you had to learn over the last 20 years to be able to write a record like this?
Eric, what do you think?
Honesty. I think that when you start out as a songwriter, it goes back to what I said earlier about writing what you know. When you start out as a songwriter, you might see something happening and you want to write about what's happening, but you don't really know it, or you've you're going to write a fictional story about a character you made up or something. But the further and further that we go into songwriting, the older we get, we realize that if you haven't lived it and you haven't experienced it, you can't talk about it. You can't tell a compelling story. And that has been the thing that I've learned the most. And you're right. Maybe 20 years ago we couldn't have I couldn't have been part of writing something like this. At least I can speak to me personally. And now that's the most important thing, is and to Brent's point, when you're writing a record that, Planet Zero is an unintentional concept record. It wasn't supposed to be a concept record, but we just had a lot of things to say that had to do with the same events, surrounding the same events. And it came together in that way. But, when you're writing, you can't deny, I guess what I'm trying to say is you can't deny what you're feeling. And if you try to deny what you're feeling and just because we've already written a song about this, so we can't write it again, and you go searching for something that isn't real, it will be to your detriment. So, and also having the courage on this record to speak out and say, when you're writing something that's a social commentary versus a personal experience, I guess, we're writing our personal experience, but we're writing about something that everyone else is experiencing. So everyone else is going to have an opinion about it. Having the courage to step on that ledge, like Brent said, and just write your opinion, write what you've seen, write what you know, and hopefully people will gravitate toward that. And they seem to have already with the song Planet Zero. And so that feels really great, but having the courage to step out on that ledge and state maybe some of your opinions that some people might not share is also something that I think just comes with age. And, you develop a lot of armor the older you get. And it's nice. It's nice to and also to have, again, to Brent's point, to have brothers and sisters in your band and organization that will stand shoulder to shoulder with you through that process is amazing.
Brent, what were some of the things that you had to learn to grow as a writer to get to this point to be able to write this?
To be willing to risk offending someone. Because what we were saying, we really concentrated on it before we said it. We looked at all avenues. We looked at the big picture. We also looked at the trajectory of the future. Because at the end of the day, listen, the band is known for presenting to the public that you are much stronger than you give yourself credit for. Like that things can be difficult and things are going to be hard at times. And, this world is going to throw you a lot of curveballs and there's going to be a lot of obstacles. And you have to learn how to take a deep breath and reset at times. But the thing is that myself and Eric and Barry and Zach, we didn't really, on this record in particular, we didn't listen to any outside influence. And what I mean by that is we were all on the same page with one another. Because listen, there is a lot of aggression on this album. There's a lot of frustration. There's definitely a lot of anger and resistance. But there is also a massive element of strength and triumph and not, refusing to give up on your fellow man, woman, and child. You know what I mean? Like not giving up on society, not giving up on the human spirit, not giving up on the planet. People talk about the internet being undefeated. Mother Nature is undefeated. If she's not shown us that in the last 3 years, I don't know, who. You have to look at your surroundings and you have to think about, okay. And to Eric's point also, we try to never make the same record over and over again, and we do our best to never write the same song twice. So you have to be willing to put it out there. you have to be willing to have conversations about it. That's the whole reason we wrote the record in the first place, is because these things, we felt like they needed to be addressed. But we've always been honest, like Eric said. We will continue to do that. The other side of that also, I have to give it something that we've not touched on here, which is probably the most important element of all of this, and the whole reason that we're even having this discussion today, or that Shinedown is a band for that matter, is we have the most extraordinary fan base on the planet Earth that allow us to evolve, that have given us a platform to be ourselves because we want them to be themselves too. But that's a huge element here, where we know that we have their support. And if it wasn't for them, I don't know if we would have the courage to write these kinds of songs and to be this bold. But, you know, it's about perseverance. We want to give people their confidence back. But a big element to all of this too, from a songwriting aspect, and, you know, this now being our 7th record that is getting ready to be released on Earth Day, which is April 22nd. A massive part of the reason why we're here is because of that fan base. Whether they've been there from the beginning or whether they're just finding out who we are. Without them, we've often said it, we have one boss.
Yeah.
It just happens to be everybody in the audience.
Well, that sense of gratitude, I think, is a beautiful place to leave it. I want to thank you guys so much for taking the time to be a part of the Working Songwriter Podcast.
And thank you so much. We appreciate it very much. Yeah.
Okay, fellas, take it easy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Shinedown's latest album is entitled Planet Zero, available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.